What's up, everyone? We're back with another fantasy football video. Today's video, we're doing our Week 5 recap and takeaways for every team that played on Sunday within 15 minutes. So, if you're interested in more content, please consider commenting, or subscribing if you're interested in fantasy football, as well as some other content too. So, before I get into every team's takeaways, I want to talk the importance of bye weeks and how your strategy changes with byes. So, now that players are going to be out for certain weeks, this changes your strategy in terms of how you buy and sell players. It's also going to change, depending on your record so far, what strategy you're going to do in terms of moving your roster forward to try to get wins put together to set yourself up for the playoffs. I will get more into this in the next video that I release tomorrow for Week 6 strategy. But just keep that in mind that this is going to be a key wrinkle that changes now that we're heading into Week 6 and entering our byes. So with that being said, we now head into our takeaways. And I will start with the first takeaway between the Rams and the Seahawks. So my takeaway with the Rams is that Woods and Kupp are still the top two wide receivers. We had some pretty significant questions about Woods based on how he started the season, but he had a very strong bounce back game in which he had 12 receptions for 150 yards. So he's still heavily involved. Would not panic on him yet. So yeah, hopefully he didn't try to sell him away or anything, because I think he will be a valuable option moving forward. I am skeptical of Tyler Higbee, though. I think he's a great sell high candidate. For Seattle, I think Geno Smith will be a serviceable quarterback backup. If you're not aware, Russell Wilson got hurt in that game, and he will be out for a couple weeks. But I think Smith will still be serviceable because of the struggles this team has on the ground game right now. That being said, they're going to have to rely on Smith to throw it quite a bit, and he will still be a decent plug and play depending on the matchups. My takeaway for the Jets in Atlanta. So for the Jets, don't drop Michael Carter if you have him on your roster. He has had some difficult stretches to the season at times. The offense is obviously very limited, but he is clearly the number one running back on this team. And if anything is indicative of the way this season is, running backs are a highly valuable commodity because of how frequently they can get injured. So just because Michael Carter only had 10 carries for 38 yards, they're going to have more opportunities for him moving forward. And just because he's in a role where he is the number one running back, you cannot drop him on your team. And I think he could reap some good value at the end with a relatively favorable schedule down the stretch. For Atlanta, my strategy is to buy low on Calvin Ridley. This is going to depend slightly upon your record because Calvin Ridley will be out next week in a bye, so you're not going to be able to use him in Week 6. But after the bye, they get Miami. And then the second half of the season, they face Dallas, Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, which is a bad pass defense, San Francisco, Detroit, and Buffalo. So that is a great stretch of games that they have on the second half of their schedule. I would recommend trying to buy low on Calvin Ridley now, since he hasn't broken out yet this season. I will talk more about him tomorrow. Denver and Pittsburgh. So my take with Denver is try to buy low on the running backs. The running backs have not stood out from each other. They've been very frustrating at times, but they do have a much favorable schedule when you get past some difficult matchups the next few weeks. So between Week 8 and Week 18, they play Kansas City twice, which is not looking like a good defense. The Chargers twice, which just gave up 42 points to the Browns and got absolutely gashed by the running game. Washington, Dallas, Detroit, and Cincinnati. So those are all relatively favorable matchups for them, and I think that those will be opportunities for the running backs to get going for Denver. I like Javonte Williams a little more, but I think both of them are decent grabs while their stock is relatively low after this week. For Pittsburgh, so my takeaway is that this offense is going to revolve around Harris, Claypool, and Deontay Johnson. I don't think that it is worth trying to add a speculative fourth player that could step up for the Juju Smith-Schuster role. You have a whole myriad of guys to include James Washington, who was injured last week, Ray McLeod, Pat Freiermuth, Eric Ebron, etc. But I just think all those guys are just going to eat away at each other's touches and not provide any consistent value. Also, if you own Najee Harris, you must add Benny Snell as a backup running back. Just take a look at how many starting running backs have gotten injured so far this season. Do your homework ahead of time on an elite running back like that and get his handcuff on your roster. Tennessee and Jacksonville. So my takeaway with Tennessee, and I'm going to get more into this tomorrow, is that Ryan Tannehill is a buy low quarterback. I will talk about this in more depth later, but rough start to the season, hadn't had his receivers healthy, and he gets Buffalo and Kansas City next week. He's going to need to throw in those games. My takeaway with Jacksonville. So Laviska Shenault, very frustrating player. I have been high on him going into the season, but he has been very inconsistent. He only had one catch for 58 yards on 2 targets in this game. So I saw an article in Pro Football Focus that I think was interesting, saying that Shenault is actually a buy low candidate because now that he's on the outside instead of the slot role because of DJ Chark's injury, he's going to get more involvement because historically he's been better on the outside than the slot. So they're saying that this game was just a fluke, buy low. I personally don't know if I agree with that, for one, because Shenault is only in his second year in the league, and this is a new coaching scheme, and if they're not going to get him the ball in this game against Tennessee's pass defense, then how is he going to put up great numbers down the road reliably? So I think, I personally, I think if you're in a roster where you're 2-3 or less, I would cut Shenault. I think he's worth an add if you're 5-0 or 4-1, for example, to just hold on to and see what happens on your bench. But my stock is very down on this guy right now. Green Bay and Cincinnati. A.J. Dillon is a must-add running back on every roster. A consideration, though, is that he has had some positive games the last 2 games, and he had some pretty poor performances where he wasn't involved. So it is going to depend on the opportunity, but he is a solid player to consider if you've got a bye week and you need a running back to plug in because of the opportunity that he can have and can show. Plus, he is an absolute lottery ticket if anything were to happen to Aaron Jones injury-wise. So A.J. Dillon stepping into that role that we thought that he might fulfill that Jamal Williams had last year. Cincinnati. So my takeaway, I was wrong about Jamar Chase. He is clearly the number 1 wide receiver on this team, and I would not be recommending to try to sell him anymore. So I apologize if I led you astray on that. But Chase is one of those guys that's really stepped up and is looking like a solid receiver. I mean, I will caveat that, and if you can get an elite caliber talent like a Stephon Diggs for Jamar Chase, I would do that trade. But still, Chase is looking like a guy that you can hold on to and will be very reliable all season. Detroit and Minnesota. So my takeaway for Detroit is pick up Amon-Ra St. Brown and don't panic with TJ Hawkinson. I will talk more about Hawkinson tomorrow, but to talk on him real quick, he can have some involvement in this offense that is very strong, and that makes me like him in terms of what he can provide, but the poor performances past 3 weeks are definitely concerning. That being said, I am willing to give him a few more weeks to see how he does, but I personally would not try to sell him right now just because you're not going to get equal value for what he can provide. Amon-Ra St. Brown I like. He's a guy that I liked in the offseason as a wide receiver who could step up as number 1. He's getting more involved every week. If you're in a deep league, consider adding him and holding him. Minnesota. So this is going to be a very interesting topic of debate that I will also talk about tomorrow, but what do you do with Dalvin Cook? And this goes to that strategy that I said about buys, is that depending on your record, Dalvin Cook is somebody that you could make an argument for buying low on or selling high on. If you've got a losing record and you do not own Alexander Madison, Cook could be a very well sell high candidate. He's not played well, but he does have a great caliber of record in terms of what he's done in the past. Plus, you're looking at potentially 2 more weeks of being out because Minnesota may very well let him continue to recover through the bye week, and he takes off week 6 and then is out week 7 for his bye. So if you've got Dalvin Cook and you've got a losing record, it's very strong consideration to sell him. I will talk more about this tomorrow. And the opposite is true, is that if you're 5-0, 4-1, he's a great buy low candidate if you're willing to be patient with the injury. Miami and Tampa Bay. So Myles Gaskin, as I'd said, buy low on him because of the opportunity that he has, and he produced a good game. But that being said, I am concerned about the consistency and the realisticness of this performance that he just had on Sunday. This was a heavy passing script game, and I think that he will be involved in games where they are coming from behind and dumping it off to the running back. But next week they play Jacksonville, which I don't think is going to be the case for this team. So Gaskin could be in for a disappointing week 6. Tampa Bay, my takeaway is that Fournette has locked himself in as a running back that you can rely upon on this team because of his PPR value. Over the last 5 games, he has had at least 3 receptions in every game. You do have Giovanni Bernard that eats into some of his pass catching value, but he's clearly outplayed Ronald Jones, and he's cemented himself as a running back that you can put in your lineup every week. That being said, I'm going to talk some more about some of their receivers, but there's some interesting buy low, sell high considerations with these receivers as well. Stay tuned for tomorrow. New Orleans and Washington. So my takeaway with New Orleans is that Callaway and Harris are waiver wire traps. They had good weeks against Washington this week, but going into a bye in week 6, that's not sustainable. So don't worry about adding them. Washington, my takeaway is that you really have to change your expectation on these pass catchers. So McLaurin, I would definitely buy low. I think that the Saints are a great defense, and Marshawn Lattimore shut him down. Next week they get Kansas City, so I suspect McLaurin will have a bounce back game. I would drop Curtis Samuel, not worth dealing with the groin injury anymore. But D'Angelo Carter and Ricky Seals-Jones are very sneaky ads to consider buying on waivers because of that matchup against Kansas City and the involvement that they had in week 5 that went kind of under the radar as a storyline in this game. Philadelphia and Carolina. So, Carolina, my takeaway with them is that DJ Moore is a great buy low candidate as well. You look at their schedule through week 12. They've got Minnesota, the Giants, Atlanta, Arizona, and Washington, which are all games that I could very well see them getting into a very pass-happy game script. They also, while Christian McCaffrey is still out, DJ Moore will have some opportunity to catch some passes in these better matchups as well. They also have Tampa Bay twice in the playoff schedule, which is the worst pass defense. So if you're in a position where you're looking to be patient with DJ Moore, potentially he's had some rough weeks the past few weeks, may not have a great matchup against Minnesota next week, but he's got some very good matchups coming up rest of the season. I like him as a buy low guy. New England and Houston. So sneaky waiver wire pickups as well. Hunter Henry, he's kind of gotten to the point where now people are going to be including him on his radar, but he's a great tight end to pick up. He's standing out as the pass catching option for them. Led the team in targets last week. Brandon Bolden as well. Very good PPR ad to consider. They're going to be in some games that they should have better offensive numbers. They've got Dallas, the Jets, and the Chargers over the next 3 weeks. These are some good guys to consider buying low on in waivers. Houston. So if you're in a pinch for a buy, consider adding David Johnson. He has proven to be a serviceable option in the PPR game. He hasn't stood out with a great performance so far, but having floor value in PPR leagues with 5 receptions each the last 2 games, standing out as the pass-catching running back on this team, he's going to have potentially a solid role for you if you're in a pinch and you need somebody to start in a bye. Cleveland and the Chargers. Very exciting game, by the way. I'm not going to get too much into that, but more so the fantasy aspect. But you cannot trust the receiving options for Cleveland at all. The stud today was David Njoku, but David Njoku's career has been wildly inconsistent the whole time. You also have Austin Hooper, who looked like he was going to be standing out as the tight end, but wasn't targeted in this game. Then you have Odell Beckham Jr., who, in a game where they score over 40 points, only had 2 receptions for 20 yards. All highly conservative for this pass-catching options on this team. So I would personally just avoid all of it. Try to see what you could sell for these guys. This is a running team, and that's their identity moving forward. The Chargers. So Jared Cook is a great sell-high candidate that I will talk about. What do you do with Keenan Allen? I will talk more about him as well tomorrow, but I think his strategy is also highly dependent on your record, because Mike Williams is standing out as the guy that's becoming the number 1 wide receiver on this team. Keenan Allen, what you do with him is really going to depend on how you perform so far this season. Chicago and Las Vegas. So Again, another record-dependent situation. The Chicago Bears. I would try to sell a lot of the Chicago Bears if you do not have a winning record. You cannot afford to continue to experiment with Allen Robinson at this point. He's been highly inconsistent. I would try to sell him for guys that, like Hunter Renfrow, for example, in the same game, that are great, more consistent options for you to deal with that can help you get back on track. The only ones that I would recommend rostering and playing if you have losing records right now are Damian Williams. And maybe Justin Herbert as a stash if you're willing to take a chance on that. But the pass-catching options in Justin Fields, I think you need to sell if you have a losing record. Las Vegas. So don't panic with Darren Waller. He has not stood out very much this year, but he is still one of the guys that is highly targeted in on this team. They've had some tough defensive matchups the past 3 weeks, and I think that they will have better matchups moving forward with Kansas City twice. They're going to have some more opportunities with some other good matchups down the road as well. I think Darren Waller is a good buy low guy, especially if you have somebody like Dawson Knox you can flip him with. San Francisco and Arizona. So the running back situation becomes even more complicated with Trey Lance. I think these are all sells to me. Trey Sermon is a drop, in my opinion, especially going into a Week 6 bye, but try to see if you can flip Elijah Mitchell and Jeff Wilson for better consistent values, because Trey Lance is a rushing quarterback who, as long as he's starting, is going to eat away at these running backs. And then you add the whole committee situation that I've already talked about a lot. Arizona, don't panic with Chase Edmonds and try to flip him. He was coming off a shoulder injury. He was limited all week in practice, did not play well in this game, but I think that he will be more reliable for them moving forward, especially since Max Williams is injured. I suspect that they will involve Edmonds more as the season goes along. Giants and Dallas. I went over 15 minutes this video. I do apologize. Giants and Dallas. So Devontae Booker must add. Kadarius Toney must add. This team is dealing with a lot of injuries, notably Saquon Barkley. So Devontae Booker is the number 2 add, in my opinion, on waivers. Number 1 I will talk about in a sec. And for Dallas. So Dallas's pass offense is another interesting scenario of what to do with it. I would personally try to sell Amari Cooper. Again, like I've talked about, he has not performed anywhere near up to the Week 1 expectations. As I said, too, he was the number 1 guy I recommended to sell. And now that he had another 3-reception game, but he did have a touchdown. So this team, when they get ahead and they could run the ball and just pound it with Zeke and Tony Pollard, and they don't need to pass it, and that's why Cooper and Lamb have struggled a little bit. I would try to sell Amari Cooper as the more notorious up and down player, especially since he got a touchdown this week. Buffalo and Kansas City last week of the Sunday. Buy low on these Buffalo running backs. After Week 7's bye, they have Miami, Jacksonville, and the Jets, which are all teams that are bad, and Buffalo is going to get ahead and just pound the rock with these guys. These running backs would go off for multiple touchdowns. I would definitely put in buy low offers on Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, especially going into this Week 7 bye. You have to be patient, but I think those are great guys to consider. I will talk more about this team and their consideration with the bye in Week 7 in tomorrow's video. And then for Kansas City, my number 1 takeaway, Darrell Williams, number 1 waiver claim with the Clyde Edwards-Helaire injury. Be interested to see how long he is out, but this offense being as explosive as it is, granted, the Sunday's game was not explosive, but Darrell Williams has the most upside, in my opinion, of the guys you can pick up on waivers if Clyde Edwards-Helaire were to miss a significant portion of time. That's all I got for this video. If you're interested, please consider commenting, or subscribing, and stay tuned for tomorrow's video on Week 6 strategy, including buy lows, sell highs, waivers, and drops. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.